Hey guys, I was scrolling on YouTube and I found this new video, or it's 11-year-old video actually, called Wealth Inequality in America. And I thought it would be a good video for us to watch together, so let's check it out.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution.
Why do most people think this is ideal? That's something that's interesting to me. And I would guess it's because most people, their income increases in a linear way, meaning they get a 5% raise every year, and so their income goes up like this. And so when that is your reality, I think you would assume that the wealth is distributed in a similar way, where everybody's getting a 5% raise per year, or the majority of people, and so you have these nice even buckets here.
Distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on.
Why do people think that's ideal? That's what is interesting to me. I think I know, and I think they think it's ideal because they view wealth as a zero-sum game. Meaning that when someone gets really wealthy, that means I am less likely to get wealthy. And this actually is really not true. And I'll give an example to prove it. Think about Amazon, and think about if Amazon were gone, how much less money would everybody have? We would have to pay more to get the same items, and we wouldn't be getting them as fast, and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people would be without work if Amazon just went away. And Amazon, in addition to giving money to all the Amazon employees and saving us money by providing items for cheaper. Amazon has also been one of the companies that has made Jeff Bezos extremely rich. And this is true for lots and lots of US companies that have made the top 1% of the US extremely wealthy. And so I've been trying to get a better understanding of the top 1% and what they actually do with their money and how it affects me personally.
This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%?
Yeah, the tone in his voice is suggesting that this is a bad thing. But in fact, this 1% here, when they grow their wealth, it grows the entire pie. It doesn't take from the rest, like he's implying.
8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years.
A lot of that's due to technology growth.
The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't.
That's a good stat there. With COVID, for example, when the US government gave out stimulus checks, everybody in this 50% did really well because the stock market just went like this because of the Treasury printing all that new money.
Which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their...
And there's an argument that you need to have a lot of money to invest. There was a point where my wife and I were only making $27,000 a year. And even that year, this was maybe 2020, we made $27,000 a year. And we were able to save $2,000 or $3,000, which is a lot for that income level. I think at any income, you can save a little bit of money and it will add up if you save and invest it.
Money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee?
See, and this is another different way of thinking that I think separates normal people like you and me from the 1%. We view our value as our effort. But actually, if I think about that, I could go out right now and spend 2 weeks digging holes in the desert. But at the end of the day, what is that going to do for anybody? I think that there's a clear difference between how hard you work and how much money you should be making. And also, I think most people in their life, as they have worked harder, their income has gone up. And so they make the assumption that in order to get to this level, you just need to work harder and harder and harder. And so when they look at the people who are at this level making this kind of money, they get upset because those people definitely are not working 380 times harder than the janitor. And so they think it's unfair, when in reality, the money that this guy is making is based off his ability to make decisions for the company that could cost way, way more than 380 times the janitor's salary. There's a limited amount of people in the world who are capable of making decisions that can make or break a large company. And so companies that want to hire these people have to compete on salary. And in most cases nowadays, the salary they make is a lot less than the amount of money that they save or make for whatever company they're working for, whatever company they're leading at the time.
Paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour.
Yeah, and they probably provide a lot less value in a month than he makes in an hour.
We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is. That is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans.
And I actually disagree with the idea that the American economy is unfair, because anybody who lives here, and even people who don't live here, are able to become part of the 1% based on the amount of value that they're able to provide to other people. It's just the case that most people don't understand why this is the reality. And it should frustrate you. It frustrates me because I don't know what I need to know in order to be part of this 1%. And so I spend a lot of time learning, and hopefully one day I'll have the understanding to be part of the 1% and generate that much value for other people. But another problem here with the idea that in order for things to be fair, you need to take money from the top 1% and give it to the rest, is that the top 1% are mobile, meaning that they can just fly away. If you crank up the taxes on their income level, they have so much wealth that they'll just move to a different country. And so when you do that, you not only lose all the tax revenue that you were going to give to the bottom 90%, you lose a lot of jobs, you lose a lot of industry, which is what we've seen happen over the last few years. And so I actually think that if you want to help this bottom 90%, taking tax from the top 1% is one of the worst things you can do. And we've seen this in our economic history. Even think, for example, with COVID, arguably this was the time that people in the bottom needed money the most. As soon as they got the stimulus checks, most people just spent it, and they got further and further into credit card debt, which brings them down lower and lower financially. And all of that money just went straight to the top. And we saw that with the stock market jumping and the wealth gap getting even wider. So it's